Hello and welcome back to FatbossTV. Today we're having a look at another 5-man dungeon that's been released on the alpha, which is the Arcway.
Yes, this was previously known as the Suramar catacombs, and this dungeon does seem to take place in the catacombs below the city of Suramar. Now, although the reason we are here isn't entirely clear, we can assume we're here to kind of like fuck shit up, because this is where Gul'dan is hanging out and he's just causing mischief. We can't know exactly because we can't do the Suramar zone just yet. Now, this dungeon has 5 bosses, and the instance is set out in 2 wings, each with 2 bosses. After taking out both wings, the last boss will spawn, and you can take him out.
Now, immediately when you enter the dungeon, you see this giant circular hall, but you can't access it just yet because you do have loads of goo that you need to deal with. Now, you have purple ones and green ones. Now, as you're killing off the purple ones, they actually split into even smaller ones, and then even smaller ones again, so you get crazy amount of these guys. And they're not too difficult to deal with. However, every time they do die, they leave patches of shit on the ground. If you stand in it, you take ticking damage. You need to constantly keep moving the ads. As for the green ones, they don't do a hell of a lot. They'll just sort of dart around and try and consume people. We just decided to stun this. We never really saw what sort of effect the consume did, but it didn't seem to be too problematic regardless. After you've taken them out, you can go into the large circular hall area, and this is where you'll come across some rats. These rats supply diseases, does really high ticking damage, and it does stack, so you do need to try and dispel it if you can. You also come across some Withered Darkfall, and these are the guys that actually were kicked out of Suramar, so they're just chilling out in the catacombs instead. These guys just do a lot of arcane damage, mainly through hard-hitting dots and also patches on the ground, but they also apply a buff that increases the damage you take from arcane, so if you have too many of these guys up, you can really get comboed. And in this instance, pretty much the majority of the trash, it isn't difficult to deal with, but if you pull too much of it, a lot of the mechanics they have do combo with one another, so you do need to be careful, especially with these Darkfallen guys.
Now, after clearing out this area, you go through a small corridor, and there you get to choose of going one of 2 ways. We decided to go forward through a door, mainly because we didn't even realize there was a choice, because there was a door to the right that you could interact with, but there's so many doors that you can't interact with that we didn't particularly notice. Now, you do enter a hallway with more Nightfallen, and off to the left you enter a gap in the wall which leads into a spider's den. Here you are faced with 2 different types of spider packs that you need to deal with. You have small spiders that explode when they die, and when they explode, they do a lot of damage. So if you can stagger their deaths or just moving away from them when they're about to explode, that isn't a bad idea. You also have some larger spiders that will jump onto players and root them, whilst giving them some sort of alien Half-Life style face hug. They don't do too much damage, and you can stun them if you want to drop off of them, but they do root you in place, so if they all jump in different directions, it can be a little bit annoying to try and AoE down. Now, once we cleared out multiple waves of these spiders, the first boss we encountered descended from the ceiling, and this is Naltira, a purple spider of doom.
Now, one of the main mechanics of this spider has is something called Never Venom. What the boss will do is just target random players and just send out goo towards them. If you stand inside this goo, you take really high ticking damage. You also get your haste reduced by 500%, so it's pretty obvious. Don't stand in the goo. The thing with these patches though is that they do last for around 5 minutes, but you do have a large area and the boss doesn't send out the ability that frequently, so you do actually have a lot of space to work with. On top of this, you'll also do something called Blink Strikes. She'll just randomly teleport to a player's location and start doing a cleave in front of herself. If you're stood inside this cleave, you do actually take a lot of damage, but if you react to the blink very quickly, you don't take any damage whatsoever, you just simply move out the way of it. And the last ability that she has is something called Tangled Web. What she'll do is just debuff 2 random players and bind them together with a single strand of web. While these players are tied together, they constantly take higher and higher ticking damage. However, you can break this strand of web simply by moving 30 yards away from one another. So that's all it is for this fight, just those 3 abilities. It's really easy to deal with. They're all just movement-based mechanics, essentially. And you have so much room that, you know, the Never Venom, as an example, just isn't an issue. So yeah, simple boss, really easy to deal with.
Yeah, I think it would maybe be better if the boss room was maybe a little bit smaller. Like, you got this inner circle, and you could do the whole fight within this inner circle, but then you got this whole outer area as well that you have to play with. So maybe to make the boss slightly more engaging, a bit more difficult, make it so the room's a bit more compact. But either way, it's quite a fun boss, and you take it down pretty easily. Now, after finishing her off, you move further into the catacombs and start taking on some Legion mobs. Now, these consist of Fel guards that will charge around leaving goo on the floor, Dreadborn Seers that will spawn eyes that will place beams on players, and casters that will spawn a lot of little imps that will deal a ton of damage. And this whole trash just deals so much damage, and this is where, like, it really comes into what Loz was saying earlier. Pulling too many of these can easily cause a wipe if you don't interrupt or stun the correct mechanics, and a lot of the mechanics require you to move, so casters do have a fair amount of trouble standing still long enough to even kill them off. Generally, a rule of thumb for this instance is just keep pulling small amounts of trash and you'll be fine. After multiple close calls and nearly wiping to trash because we pulled far too much, we entered the next boss area where General Zakao lives.
And this is pretty much Fel Lord's brother. It looks exactly the same. He does an ability called Fel Fissure. This just spawns a large circle on the ground that just sort of rotates, and after 3 seconds it will become active. While it is active, if you do stand inside it, it will detonate, spawn a crystal, and deal damage to whoever activated it, as well as anyone within 6 yards, and knock them far into the air. While the crystals are active, they don't do anything whatsoever. They don't do any ticking damage on the raid or anything like that. However, they are a physical object, so you could potentially maybe create line of sight issues.
Potentially, yeah. So generally move from the circle so you don't take damage, because it is very, very high. As Loz found out when he got bored and proc 3 in a row, and then got comboed by other abilities and died.
Yeah.
Now, something that can knock you into these Fel Fissures is something called Wicked Slam. This is a cast that will deal damage and knock back all players in the group. So you got to make sure that you're not knocked back into a Fel Fissure circle, otherwise you can just easily be comboed and end up like Loz.
The boss also casts something called Shadow Slash. This is just like a wave that he sends out at a random player. If you get hit by it, you take some damage. It's very simple, you just need to sidestep it. And lastly, the boss will also spawn Fel Bats. When these add spawns, they'll do a couple of bombardment flybys on the group. If you're hit by the bombs, which are indicated by little circles on the ground, you'll just take a little bit of damage. And after they've flown by a couple of times, the bats will land. You just need to have your tank pick them up and you just cleave them down. And that's really this encounter. Providing you don't stand in any of the Fel Fissures, nothing can really kill you.
Yeah, exactly. Now, after finishing off the boss, you actually need to backtrack through the instance. We didn't realize this and spent like a good 10 minutes trying to find out where the fuck we needed to go. There was a couple of dead ends with trash packs that you didn't need to pull all together, so although this was like a little bit confusing, it was actually nice to be in a dungeon where it wasn't 100% clear exactly where you needed to go. Instead, you needed to explore in order to find your way, something that I haven't like felt or seen in a dungeon for quite a long time. Now, once we found the door at the beginning of the dungeon and actually opened it, we found ourselves in another corridor full of the Nightfallen. On the left, we found a corridor that led to the next boss room, and this room was full of trash once again, and you actually had the Nightborn elves, the ones that aren't Nightfallen yet, they were fighting the Nightfallen, and this trash really hurt. They had some really nasty dots, they had AoE areas on the floor that buffed them up, they had hard-hitting spellcast barriers where you needed to fight them from behind, and it was generally so vicious, and it was very easy to overpull because they're super compact, and of course we did overpull, and we wiped because we hadn't learned from anywhere else in the instance that we shouldn't do that yet. So yeah, this room you just have to be very careful, and it's really beneficial at this point to kind of like line of sight the trash out of the room just to keep everything under control.
So after we cleared all those out, we got to fight the boss, which is Corstel Axe, which is like an arcane horseman Hecarim lookalike.
Yeah, pretty much.
So this guy has 4 main abilities, one of them being Quarantine. What he'll do is just spawn a crystal near a player that will stun that player for 20 seconds. While they are stunned, they take very large ticking damage, and over that 20-second period, they'll probably die unless they get some form of healing. However, you can completely remove the stun by having another player running to the crystal and right-clicking on it, which will like create a channel for 1 or 2 seconds, and this just completely removes the crystal and removes the stun. On top of this, he has something called Suppression Protocol. This is a 5-second channel cast where he'll fixate a random player and just send out a series of bolts towards them. If the player is hit by these bolts, they take a large amount of damage, and they also get a debuff that increases the amount of arcane damage they take. You can, however, completely dodge this bolt. It is like a traveling projectile. All you need to do is just sidestep while you have the debuff active and while the boss is casting the channel.
Now, the boss will also cause pipes to burst around the sides of the room. This will coat the entire group with 2 stacks of a new debuff called Nightwell Energy. This Nightwell Energy gives you 15% haste per stack, so it's a good debuff. It also places several pools of goo on the floor, and these patches can be ran over and then absorbed by a player, and each patch will give you 1 extra stack of the Nightwell Energy. So when the pipe bursts, you want to go around and collect any nearby purple patches just to gain the extra haste. However, the boss will remove your stacks with an ability called Cleansing Force. This is an 8-second channel where the boss will drag in all players while removing 1 stack of Nightwell energy off of you per second. After 8 seconds, he will explode, dealing damage to anyone within 15 yards. And if you have any Nightwell energy and you're hit by this effect, you'll be stunned for 12 seconds. So the idea is that you need to run away to try and avoid the explosion. And it does seem that the closer you are to the boss, the stronger the pull. So if you're in the middle of his hitbox, it's unlikely you're going to be able to leave it. However, if you're on the other side of the room, you should be able to outrun it. But that's it, you just keep going through those cycles on the boss where the pipe will burst and then he'll cleanse you while you have to click on crystals and run away from suppression protocols. It's a pretty fun boss, there's a lot of movement involved. I just really hope that they kind of add that punishing effect to getting too much Nightwell energy on this boss. I think that'll be really fun because right now, of course, you can't really proc
It'd be interesting if the entire room fills with the Nightwell energy.
Yeah, because then you have like a little balance. Should I go around and get like 500 stacks so I have like insta-cast everything, or should I not do that because otherwise I'm going to be stunned for 12 seconds? It'll give you like an interesting choice to make. So maybe if you want to go for those speed kills, you can try and do that. Otherwise, you'll just get a couple of stacks and just generally stand still.
Now, after we killed that guy off, we went into an area of the dungeon where we found lots of Arcane Elementals. One of these elementals has an AoE on the entire group, but it is interruptible. It's quite a long cast. It's pretty much the same as the mobs from Shadowmoon Burial Ground. So interrupt them and you have no issues. And another one just spawns orbs that float around and deal damage to the group if you get hit. And they also have a large shockwave that deals a lot of damage. So you need to make sure that you avoid that as well. After dealing with them, you then enter a library room, which just has mana worms all over the place. Now, these mana worms just spam a cast called Never Spike. This just targets a random player and sends out a bolt. It's similar to like a Shadow Crash, I guess, where it just lands on top of them and deals a load of damage. You can avoid them simply just by moving out of the targeting circle that's on the ground. However, if you pull both sides like we did, there are so many bolts being sent out that you can't really do anything, because of course you need to stop to cast a heal at least in my case I had to stop to cast a heal, and it's just ridiculous. And if you've got AoE explosions going off as well from all the Arcane Elementals, you're going to wipe.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, after a corpse run and a more measured approach where we actually did the trash as she was probably supposed to do the trash, we cleared out the room and then we got to face the fourth boss, which is Ivanyear. Now, this boss completely works around his mana. One of his abilities is Arcane Blast. He'll just be spamming this on your tank, it will just deal some damage. But something that everyone needs to keep an eye out for is Volatile Magic. This debuffed 2 players for 4 seconds, and after these 4 seconds, they would explode and do a large amount of damage to anyone within 15 yards. So you've got to make sure you do move out with the debuff. The damage it deals is very high, and if it's on 2 melee DPS at the same time, and they both explode on top of each other, it wouldn't surprise me if one of them would probably die. Now, one of the most interesting abilities that the boss does is Netherlink. This links 3 players together and starts pushing them away from one another. After 5 seconds, the link is broken and the entire area between the 3 targets is entirely coated in this purple cloud that deals ticking damage. So the idea is that you try and stay as close together to make the smallest triangle of pain possible. We wanted to make a big triangle, so we did. And like my computer nearly died. Yeah. It absolutely destroys your FPS.
The FPS is absolutely terrible from these abilities. It's kind of like in Violet Hold, you know, like all the frosty shit on the top platform. This is just as bad.
Yeah, it absolutely annihilated your FPS. But if you made smaller triangles, it seemed it like affected your computer less. And of course, they do despawn after a little while. It takes a while, but yeah, hopefully they fix the FPS issues. Either way, it's a really, really cool mechanic. The thing is, the pushback on this ability is really, really strong. It actually does make it very difficult to try and move closer to your tethered allies. Pretty much, you can just stay in position the whole time. So if you're in a shit spot at the beginning, unless you have like a blink or maybe a disengage or something, you're just going to stay in that position and have a really, really giant, horrible triangle. Now, occasionally, the boss would go over to a crystal and start doing something called Overcharged Manner. This would just give him a stacking buff that increases haste and his mana cost by 5% per stack. This can be interrupted, which would help reduce the damage, but it would actually increase the amount of time he has mana for, because each time the boss casts an ability, he uses up a percentage of his mana pool, and once he's run out of mana, he'll go into his like last phase where he just spam casts Withering Consumption, which would just deal ticking damage to the entire group over 6 seconds. So you can choose, do you want to have to deal with the triangles and the Volatile Magic, where the boss actually has mana, because once he's run out of mana, he's not doing Arcane Blast, he's not doing Volatile Magics, he's not doing Netherlinks anymore. He's just kind of draining the group every now and then. He just sort of
is a target dummy that does AoE damage.
Yeah, exactly. So the last phase is maybe a little bit boring, but I think the first phase totally makes up for it with the Netherlink. Like, those triangles are just, it's just so funny, because I know that for a fact in a pug group, you're going to get 3 people going all 3 corners of the room and just cover the entire room in FPS destroying goo.
So after we killed off Ivanyear, we decided to go and find the last boss. What happens is that he actually shouts out in Yell, you can see it in your chat, he says a load of shit, and you just need to go find him. There's no indication whatsoever where he actually is, and this place is ginormous, so we had to go around trying to find exactly where he was, and it just so happened to be that he was right at the start of the dungeon after we just cleared a load of trash that we didn't even need to kill.
Yeah, this place just has so many different, like, routes through it. I'm pretty sure that if you wanted to, every time you went in here, you could probably take a different direction, and you'll probably end up clearing the whole place. As long as there's mobs there, just follow them, I suppose.
Yeah, well, that's what we did.
Yeah, we did get lost quite a lot in this dungeon, but we did find him at the very start in the big circular room that you do first clear, and this is where you find the last boss, Advisor Vandross.
Now, a very important mechanic that this guy has is something called Accelerating Blast. This is a cast that he'll spam on the tank that just deals a small amount of damage, but it also increases the boss's damage and haste by 5% per stack, and he'll cast this ability a lot. If you do not interrupt it, his stack is going to go so high that people are just going to die from random shit. So you really need to make sure you interrupt it. However, if you only interrupt it once and you don't re-interrupt it again, the stack's just going to keep going up. So you need to organize some form of interrupt rotation, which is pretty crazy considering it's a 5-man. Now, one of the most annoying abilities the boss does is something called Chrono Shards. What he'll do is just summon multiple shards that just hover around the room, and after 8 seconds, they'll explode and deal damage to anyone within 10 yards of them. Now, the boss casts this so frequently that we found that moving him constantly around the circle each time he casts his ability helped us avoid the mechanic completely. As long as you keep him interrupted, he's very, very easy to move around. However, if you did stand still, I guess you could find ways of avoiding these shards, but it would be very, very difficult because there are so many of them. Now, the boss also does something called Force Bomb, which again kind of makes dodging these shards a little bit difficult, especially if you stand right on top of them. What he'll do is spawn 2 bombs, and after 4 seconds, they'll explode, dealing damage to anyone directly on top of them. However, they will also send out a Force Pulse style mechanic that you've seen from Margok. This just does ticking damage and pushes you back, however you can run through it.
With this phase, the whole idea is if you can all move as one unit every single time, it's very, very easy to deal with everything. Just keep interrupting the boss, move every time Chrono Shards spawn, and then just run through the Force Bombs. However, once the boss reaches 50% HP, he will stun the entire group and just teleport you to another location in the dungeon. The location he teleports you to doesn't always seem to be the same each time. We did this phase twice, and both times was in different locations. You then have 2 minutes to try and reach the boss room again, and if you don't make it in time, you'll all just instantly die. So, whilst moving back towards the boss, you need to keep dodging multiple Chrono Shards that are all over the place, as well as take out ads that have like a channeled 10-second stun that needs to be interrupted. This part was very, very cool.
Yeah, it's very reminiscent of Dead Mines.
Yeah, on Heroic, 100%.
Yeah, it's exactly the same. It's the exact same idea. You got to get back as soon as you possibly can. And I thought this bit was brilliant because this place is so huge, and because it's a bit of a maze, especially the first time you go there, where you have absolutely no idea where you need to go. I thought this bit was really fun, especially because you're sat on a timer as well, and it's like you need to get back before you die. I mean, the second time when we did it, we got back really, really quickly.
Yeah, 100%. I think that once you've done this once or twice, it'll be very easy, but the first time that you do it, it is very, very fun.
Yeah.
It's pretty scary as well, because of all the mechanics going on at the same time, and there's ads, and if you don't all stick together, like, you know that there's going to be one person who's just going to run off by themselves, like, no, I know the better way, and they're just going to pull an ad, and then you're going to get stunned, and it's all going to go horribly wrong. It is a really, really nice mechanic, but once you do reach the boss again, the phase will end, and the boss will just return back to his first phase, unchanged, and then he dies, and that's the dungeon. And what a dungeon it is.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think it's a very, very good dungeon. Because it is a maze, it just makes it so much fun. It really does feel like you're exploring, you know, it feels like the old days almost in a way, where dungeons aren't necessarily completely clear. They don't feel linear. I mean, you can argue that a lot of dungeons these days aren't linear. Some of them they've released recently, such as, you know, Eye of Ashara, where you can choose where to go. But that's still obvious. It's still obvious where things are. Because this instance is multi-layered, and because so many doors look exactly the same as other doors you've already been through, but you can't go through them, you really do feel like you have to explore the place. And I really like that feeling. It feels nice. And the aesthetic of this place is just like Karazhan, you know. It's so cool.
Yeah,
with all the floating books and all that shit. It looks brilliant.
Exactly. It's absolutely amazing. And once again, talking about the trash, although we've ragged on it a little bit, I think it's very clear to say that it is very punishing, but it is fair. Like, doing a big multi-pull will kill you unless you're very, very good at interrupting the very key mechanics. Because a lot of the trash by itself isn't lethal, but it seems that they've designed the trash in such a way that X trash will affect how you deal with Y trash. So if you did pull them at the same time, they're a lethal combo, but by themselves it's absolutely fine, which I really like because if you do want to go through it at a higher pace, you get that extra layer of like challenge on top of it. So
which is going to make challenge modes interesting.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's a really, really nice way of designing trash where, although they are quite hard by themselves, when you pull them at the same time, it's very, very difficult.
But one thing about the trash, though, I would say there's maybe slightly too much. And really, that's because the dungeon is just so huge. It takes a long time to go through this place. I think it took us almost an hour.
Yeah, on our first run.
On our first run through. But the trash is varied, so it's not too boring. It's not like you're killing the same shit over and over again. And they do have, of course, these crazy mechanics which do keep you on your toes.
Talking of mechanics as well, I would say that the boss design in this place, it does require a nice amount of attention. You can't really phase out and hope to kill a boss. Although I would say that certain bosses do need a little bit more work, like
Spider.
Yeah, it's the spider boss room. It just really, it didn't feel threatening at all. It really did feel like it doesn't matter where you place all of the horrible mechanics. It doesn't matter really where you stand because you can deal with the mechanics nice and easily. And once again, the stacks on the horseman. But all of that stuff I think can be changed and maybe enhanced. Because once again, this is normal mode. On heroic, they might make it so the spider room just suddenly is covered in goo around the outside, so you do have a tiny amount of place to work in, and maybe the horseman will have a ton more goo on the floor, so you get a ton more stacks, and then maybe might be able to be stunned. So I think there's a lot of potential for this place on heroic, especially the last boss. Imagine that run back on the last boss on heroic.
Yeah.
Like, they could add loads of these spinning lightning bolts that one-shot you, like in Dead Mines and all that kind of shit. I can't wait to go on it in a pug with no one who can move properly. It's going to be amazing.
Well, thank you very much for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this little preview, then drop us down a like. It helps us out a lot. And we shall see you in the next video.
Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching.